Close your eyes for a second and think about the last time a piece of media made you physically recoil. Not because of a cheap jump scare or a loud noise. There are books out there that don't just tell a story. They perform a kind of psychological surgery on the reader. They push against the boundaries of what we consider polite, rational, or even human. They dive into the pockets of the soul we usually keep zipped shut. Today, we aren't just looking at scary stories. We are looking at the most uncomfortable books ever written. The ones that make your skin feel too tight and your house feel too quiet. These are the narratives that challenge your morality, your sanity, and your stomach. If you're looking for a cozy bedtime story, this is your warning to turn back now, because once these ideas are in your head, you can't exactly unread them. Let's start with a book that has become a bit of a cultural litmus test for endurance. Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterrica. This isn't just a book about a dystopian future. It's a clinical examination of how easily we can normalize the unthinkable. The premise is simple and terrifying. A virus has supposedly made all animal meat poisonous to humans. In response, society transitions to what they call special meat, which is just a fancy way of saying they started farming people. What makes this book so deeply uncomfortable isn't just the concept, it's the language. The author uses cold, detached descriptions of processing plants and butcher shops. The characters don't refer to the beings as people. They are heads or stock. It's a masterclass in how language can be used to strip away someone's humanity. As you read it, you start to look at our own world and wonder about the things we've normalized simply by changing the words we use to describe them. The ending of this book is famous for being a punch to the gut that leaves you feeling incredibly cynical about the human heart. It's the kind of book you have to put down every few chapters just to remind yourself that you're still breathing. Moving from the visceral to the psychological, we need to talk about Kevin by Lionel Shriver. This is a story told through letters from a mother to her estranged husband, reflecting on their son, who has committed an unspeakable act at his high school. While many stories focus on the motives of the person who commits the crime, this book focuses on the maternal perspective, and it is brutal. It explores a taboo that our society rarely wants to touch: the idea that a mother might not love her child, or that a child might be born fundamentally lacking empathy. The discomfort comes from the mother's honesty. She admits to her own coldness, her own resentment, and her suspicion that her son was a predator from the moment he was born. It forces the reader to confront the nature versus nurture debate in the most painful way possible. Is it possible for a person to be born beyond saving? Or did the mother's lack of affection create the monster? Every page feels like walking on broken glass because there are no heroes in this story, only survivors of a tragedy that started in a nursery. If we want to discuss books that mess with your perception of reality, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski is the gold standard. This book is a physical experience. The layout of the text changes constantly. You'll find yourself turning the book upside down, reading footnotes that lead to more footnotes, and tracking lines of text that spiral around the page. The story is about a family who moves into a house that is slightly larger on the inside than it is on the outside. But that small discrepancy grows until there are infinite, dark hallways appearing within the walls. The discomfort here is twofold. First, there's the claustrophobia of the house itself. But more importantly, there's the meta-narrative of the man who is reading the journals of the man who watched the film about the house. You feel like you're losing your mind along with the characters. Long after you've closed it, you might find yourself taking a tape measure to your own hallways, just to be sure. Then there is The Wasp Factory by Iain Banks. This was Banks's debut novel, and it caused a massive stir because of its dark, surreal content. It follows a 16-year-old named Frank living on a remote Scottish island. Frank has his own set of bizarre, violent rituals, including the titular wasp factory, a clock face used to predict the future through the suffering of insects. Frank's world is one of isolation and strange, self-imposed laws. The discomfort stems from how casually Frank describes the various things he has done to his family and his surroundings. It's a very intimate look at a mind that has been warped by a lack of guidance and a surplus of secrets. When the final revelation about Frank's identity and his past comes out, it changes everything you thought you knew about the story. It's a book that explores the construction of gender and identity through a lens of extreme trauma, and it stays with you like a cold fog. Speaking of isolation and the breakdown of the human spirit, we have to mention The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is perhaps one of the most famous examples of a book that is almost too painful to read. It follows a father and son as they walk through a gray, ash-covered world, trying to reach the coast. There are no names, no explanations for how the world ended, and no hope. The discomfort comes from the sensory deprivation. McCarthy writes in a way that makes you feel the cold, the hunger, and the constant vibrating fear of other people. It's a look at the absolute bottom of human existence, when every social contract has vanished and all that's left is the drive to survive. What do we become? The father's desperate love for his son is the only light in the book, but even that feels fragile against the overwhelming darkness of the world they inhabit. It's a book that makes you grateful for a warm meal and a locked door in a way very few stories can. Now let's pivot to something that feels a bit more modern but equally soul-crushing. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This book is a marathon of emotional endurance. It follows four friends over decades, focusing primarily on Jude, a man with a past so traumatic it almost defies description. The discomfort here doesn't come from a fast-paced plot or a high concept, but from the relentless, detailed accumulation of pain. Yanagihara doesn't look away from the consequences of abuse, and she doesn't offer easy healing. For hundreds of pages, you are submerged in Jude's self-loathing and his struggle to believe he is worthy of love. It's a controversial book because some see it as trauma porn, while others see it as a profound exploration of human resilience. Regardless of where you stand, there is no denying that it is one of the most emotionally exhausting experiences a reader can have. It will make you weep, it will make you angry, and it will leave you feeling raw for weeks. For those who find discomfort in the surreal and the grotesque, The Vegetarian by Han Kang is a must-read. A woman in South Korea decides to stop eating meat after a disturbing dream. This one choice ripples out through her family, leading to acts of violence, obsession, and eventually the woman's desire to stop being human altogether and turn into a plant. The book is divided into 3 parts, each told from a different person's perspective, but never the woman herself. The discomfort comes from the way her body and her choices are treated as property by those around her. It's a story about the rebellion of the self against the expectations of society. The imagery of her trying to photosynthesize and refusing to eat anything but water is haunting. It's a quiet, poetic kind of horror that makes you question the very nature of agency and the physical boundaries of our own skins. Let's move on to Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. If you thought the road was dark, this earlier work is arguably even more uncomfortable. It follows a man named Lester Ballard, who is slowly ostracized from society and retreats into the caves of Tennessee. As he becomes more isolated, he descends into truly depraved behavior. McCarthy writes Lester not as a mustache-twirling villain, but as a feral animal, a product of a world that didn't know what to do with him. The lack of judgment in the writing makes it even more unsettling. You are simply a witness to his decline. It's a book that forces you to acknowledge that there are people who exist entirely outside the bounds of what we consider civilized, and that the line between a person and a monster is much thinner than we'd like to believe. If you want a book that will make you look at your own bathroom mirror with suspicion, try I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. It starts as a simple psychological thriller about a woman going on a road trip with her boyfriend to meet his parents. But as the trip progresses, things start to feel wrong. Conversations don't quite match up. Time feels elastic. And there's a sense of impending doom that is never fully explained until the very end. The discomfort here is the feeling of being gaslit by the narrative itself. You know something is wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. It explores themes of loneliness, the passage of time, and the fragmented nature of identity. It's a short read, but its impact is massive because it challenges the internal logic we use to define who we are. Now, let's talk about a classic that still has the power to disturb today, Blindness by Jose Saramago. A city is struck by a sudden epidemic of white blindness. The government, in a panic, rounds up the first group of blind people and shuts them in a filthy, overcrowded asylum. The breakdown of social order is instantaneous and horrific. Without the ability to see each other, the characters lose their sense of shame and, eventually, their sense of humanity. It's a story about the fragility of civilization. How many of our morals are based purely on the fact that others can see us? Saramago's writing style, which uses very little punctuation and long, flowing paragraphs, adds to the sense of disorientation and chaos. It's a grueling look at what people are capable of when they believe no one is watching, and when the base instincts for food and safety take over everything else. A more contemporary look at the decay of the soul can be found in The Slap by Christos Tsiolkas. This book doesn't have any supernatural elements or dystopian settings. The plot is simple. At a suburban barbecue, a man slaps a child who is not his own. The rest of the book explores how this one event impacts everyone who was present. The discomfort comes from the sheer ugliness of the characters. Tsiolkas lays bare their prejudices, their infidelities, their selfishness, and their hypocrisies. It's an incredibly uncomfortable read because it feels so real. You might recognize yourself or people you know in these flawed, often unlikable characters. It's a brutal examination of modern middle-class life and the tensions that bubble just beneath the surface of our polite social interactions. It's the kind of book that makes you want to take a shower after reading it. Then there is The Story of the Eye by Georges Bataille. This is a very short, very intense book that sits at the intersection of erotica and horror. It follows two teenagers as they engage in increasingly transgressive and violent sexual acts. The reason it's so uncomfortable isn't just the content, but the philosophy behind it. Bataille was fascinated by the idea of excess and the breaking of boundaries. The book uses recurring motifs, like eyes, eggs, and milk, in ways that are profoundly disturbing. It's a surrealist nightmare that forces the reader to confront the link between desire and destruction. It's definitely not for everyone, and it remains one of the most controversial books in French literature for its refusal to provide any moral ground for the reader to stand on. Let's dive into some historical discomfort with The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kosinski. This book was originally marketed as an autobiographical account of a young boy wandering through Eastern Europe during the Second World War. While much of the book's authenticity was later questioned, the impact of the writing remains. It is a relentless catalog of cruelty. The boy encounters various villagers who treat him with unimaginable brutality because they believe he is a bad omen or a gypsy. The title refers to a bird that is painted with bright colors and released back into its flock, only for its own kind to attack it because it looks different. It's a metaphor for the senseless violence humans inflict on those they perceive as other. The descriptions of animal abuse and human violence are vivid and nauseating. It's a book that asks how a child can possibly keep their soul in a world that seems dedicated to destroying it. For a different kind of psychological dread, consider Misery by Stephen King. While many know the movie, the book is much more intense. It's a story about a writer who is rescued after a car crash by his #1 fan, Annie Wilkes. The discomfort here is the powerlessness. Paul Sheldon is physically broken and completely dependent on a woman who is increasingly unstable. The book delves deep into the relationship between a creator and their audience, and the terrifying idea of someone claiming ownership over another person's mind and work. There are scenes in the book, specifically the one involving an axe, that are far more graphic than anything shown on screen. It's a masterclass in tension and the horror of being trapped in a small space with someone who has completely abandoned reality. Another book that explores the darker side of human obsession is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is perhaps the most famous uncomfortable book ever written. The discomfort comes from the prose. Nabokov's writing is beautiful, lyrical, and incredibly persuasive. And yet the narrator, Humbert, is a predator. The book forces the reader into a position of complicity. You find yourself wandering through his beautiful sentences only to be reminded of the horrific reality of what he is doing to a child. It's a test of the reader's moral compass. Can you admire the art while being repulsed by the artist and the character? It remains a deeply disturbing read because it highlights how easily charm and intellect can be used to mask the most heinous actions. Let's move to the visceral world of American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Most people have seen the movie starring Christian Bale, which is a dark comedy. The book, however, is not a comedy. It is a grueling, repetitive, and incredibly graphic descent into the mind of Patrick Bateman. For every chapter about clothes or music, there is a chapter of extreme, clinical violence that is almost impossible to get through. The discomfort here is the banality of it. Bateman treats a horrific act with the same level of detail as he treats his morning skincare routine or his critique of a pop song. It's a searing indictment of 1980s consumerism and the emptiness of a society that values surfaces over everything else. The violence is so extreme that the book was banned in some countries and remains one of the most polarizing novels of the 20th century. For something that feels like a fever dream, check out Crash by J.G. Ballard. This book explores a small group of people who are sexually obsessed with car crashes. They find a deep, disturbing eroticism in the union of human flesh and machine. The discomfort stems from the way Ballard describes the human body in mechanical terms. It's a look at how technology can warp our most basic instincts. The characters aren't just looking for thrills. They are looking for a new kind of transcendence through pain and metal. It's a cold, clinical, and deeply alienating book that makes you look at every car on the highway as a potential site of both disaster and desire. We must also mention Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo. This is a story about a soldier in the First World War who wakes up in a hospital bed to realize he has lost his limbs, his face, and all of his senses except for touch. He is a protoplasmic heart trapped inside a useless body. The book is a stream of consciousness narrative of his struggle to communicate and his descent into despair. The discomfort is the ultimate form of claustrophobia. The idea of being locked in like that, with a fully functioning mind but no way to interact with the world, is one of the most terrifying concepts imaginable. It's a powerful anti-war novel that focuses not on the heroics of the battlefield, but the long, silent agony of those left behind. In a similar vein of physical and emotional suffering, there's The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. This book is particularly uncomfortable because it is loosely based on the real-life case of Sylvia Likens. It follows a young girl who is sent to live with her aunt, who proceeds to lead her own children and the neighborhood kids in a campaign of systematic torture against the girl. The story is told from the perspective of a young boy next door, who watches everything happen but fails to act. The discomfort comes from the depiction of how quickly children can be led into cruelty by a twisted authority figure. It's a book about the loss of innocence and the discovery that the monsters in this world aren't hiding in the woods. They're living in the house next door, making sandwiches and going to church. For those who enjoy a bit of existential dread, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti is a non-fiction book that reads like a horror novel. Ligotti argues for a philosophy of extreme pessimism, suggesting that human consciousness is a tragic mistake of evolution. He posits that we are puppets who have been given the illusion of selfhood, and that the only logical response to our existence is to stop reproducing and let the species fade away. The discomfort comes from how well argued his points are. Even if you don't agree with him, he plants seeds of doubt about the value and purpose of life that can be very hard to shake. It's the ultimate black pill of literature, and it shaped much of the nihilistic philosophy seen in the first season of True Detective. Let's talk about a book that tackles religious and moral discomfort. The Last Temptation of Christ by Nikos Kazantzakis. This book caused a massive uproar when it was released because it portrays Jesus as a man struggling with human desires, fears, and doubts. The discomfort for many was the demystification of a sacred figure, but for any reader, the book is a heavy exploration of the conflict between the spirit and the flesh. And the temptation of the title is the desire to lead a normal, happy life instead of fulfilling a divine but painful destiny. It's a deeply philosophical work that forces you to think about the nature of sacrifice and the heavy burden of purpose. There is also Geek Love by Catherine Dunn. This is a story about a family of carnival performers who decide to intentionally breed themselves into freaks by using various chemicals and radioactive isotopes. The goal is to create their own aristocracy of the unusual. The discomfort here is the subversion of beauty standards and the intense, often toxic loyalty of the family. The narrator is a hunchbacked, albino dwarf named Olympia. The book is full of vibrant, grotesque imagery and a deep sense of yearning. It's a cult classic because it celebrates the other in a way that is both beautiful and repulsive. It makes you question where our definitions of normal come from and why we are so threatened by those who fall outside of them. Finally, we cannot overlook Lord of the Flies by William Golding. While many read this in high school, it's worth revisiting as an adult to truly feel the discomfort of its themes. A group of schoolboys stranded on an island don't build a utopia. They build a nightmare. The most disturbing part is the character of Piggy, the rational, intellectual voice who is slowly silenced by the mob. The book suggests that the thin veneer of civilization is easily stripped away when people are scared and when they have a common enemy to focus on. The beast isn't on the mountain, it's in the boys. The ending, where they are rescued by a naval officer, offers no real relief, as the officer himself is just a representative of the larger, more efficient world of organized violence. What all of these books have in common is their refusal to play it safe. They don't care if you're comfortable. In fact, their goal is often to make you as uncomfortable as possible, because that's where the real thinking happens. When we are pushed to our limits, we are forced to reevaluate our values and our understanding of the world. These books serve as a shadow library of the human experience, documenting the parts of ourselves we'd rather not see. Reading an uncomfortable book is a bit like staring into an eclipse. It's a way of testing our own boundaries. How much can we tolerate? How much can we understand? By the time you reach the final page of a book like Tender is the Flesh or A Little Life, you aren't the same person you were at the beginning. You've seen things you can't forget, and you've felt things you didn't know you were capable of feeling. That is the true power of literature. It's not just about entertainment or escape. It's about empathy, even when the person we are empathizing with is someone we find repulsive. It's about understanding the full spectrum of existence, from the highest peaks of joy to the deepest pits of suffering, in all our messy, terrifying, and complicated glory. If any of these titles sound like something you can handle, give them a try. But don't say I didn't warn you. They might change the way you sleep at night, and they will definitely change the way you look at the world next time you step outside. There is a strange kind of beauty in the darkness, and sometimes the most uncomfortable paths are the ones that lead to the most profound realizations. So what about you? Is there a book that made you want to throw it across the room, but you kept reading anyway? Is there a story that still haunts your thoughts months after you finished it? The world of literature is vast, and there are always new nightmares to discover. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the uncomfortable. Keep your mind open, keep your heart strong, and never stop searching for the stories that challenge you. Life is too short for boring books. Go find something that makes you feel something, even if that something is a little bit of dread. Until next time, stay curious and keep reading.